Vanakkam and welcome to Sudarshan's podcast. I'm Sudarshan, the host. Today I have Rakesh Venugopal, who is the Chief of Staff at Growth School. Hey Rakesh, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, Sudarshan. Thank you for having me.
Yes. To give a quick intro about Rakesh, he was working with Unacademy MPL before. MPL as a Chief of Staff, and in Unacademy he worked on business and strategy roles. And he's a ISB grad. Yes, because okay, this episode, okay, I haven't spoken about it, right? Yes, this episode will be about chief of staff. Recently, for the last couple of episodes, we were discussing and going deep on specific roles. Yeah, you must have seen a product management episode where I have spoken with multiple product managers who have more than a decade of experience from Yellow, Devrev, and Iman Limited. And now this is happening. And chief of staff is something definitely not like product management. This is more fluid. You are like a water, right? You go go to a company and you fit in there. That's how it works. But we'll have to just not give that water or ambiguous example. So that's why I brought in Rakesh to this. Yes, we'll talk more about chief of staff strategy, founders office, what they do in their day to day, and more. Let's get in, Rakesh.
Sure. So, where do you want me to begin?
Yep. Okay. Okay. Since I said ISB, um, is ISB or any MBA, IIMs is required to become a chief of staff?
Well, I would say it certainly helps. So one thing that I would say is, these premier institutes, it helps you for the rigor of any role, not just for the chief of staff, right? More than about what you actually learn in the classrooms. It's about a lifestyle change, right? So and that's what these courses actually help you for, because when you're taking on a role as a chief of staff, and especially for a early stage or a mid stage startup, right? I mean, the basic requirement that you need to fulfill is you need that hunger to hustle, if I may, right? You would need to actually spend long hours. You would need that focus to actually complete the task that's given to you. And more often than not, the tasks that come to you are as varied as it can get, because you dip your hands in everything across the organization. And your basic you exist for making a positive delta on a daily basis or a weekly basis, right? So I would say that, if it's not a prerequisite, it will definitely help. If you have been there, you have gone through the grind, and you have done your MBA from, let's say, an IIM or an ISB, or for any institute for that matter, which actually helps you prepare for this journey, right?
Right. So you mentioned two things: lifestyle change and your ability to make impact weekly, every day, or in a some regular time interval basis, right? So, what lifestyle change did ISB give you that is helping you now?
See, one thing definitely is, before ISB, or before ISB, basically, I mean, you don't. So I've not been to a premier engineering college before this. So just to give you a little bit of a background, I am born and brought up in Kerala. I did my schooling and my bachelor's in Kerala. And post that, I was working. I My first job was with Capgemini, where I worked for 3.5 years. There, I realized that, this is not what I want to do, because I was actually there on a fast track to make team lead, which I eventually did. And then they were actually going to send me across abroad. You know what everybody does at that point of time. This was way back in 2008 to 11, which I'm talking about, right? So I quickly realized that that's not the career path that I wanted to choose. So then, uh, after that, 2 3 years was purely trying to figure out what is it that I wanted to do. So in that purpose, I attempted my civil services for a year. I actually qualified for the mates in my first attempt, but didn't make it through the interview I lost the interview call by 100 marks at that time. All right. And then at that time, your middle class mentality kicks in, your survival instincts kicks in, right? You don't want to spend, say, more than 1 or 2 years for such an examination. Then the question arises in your mind as to what next. And the only, answer forward was you do an MBA, right? And one realization that I also had was I did not have it in me to say score a 99.99 percentile in CAT to get into an IIM. And I was pretty sure, or I was pretty sure myself, that if I wanted to do an MBA, I'll do it from a premier institute, right? So the selection process of ISB was more suited for somebody like me. What I mean to say is they just do not look at the marks from a qualifying examination, but they also look at, what have you done so far with your life, and where do you want to actually go with your life, your profile as such, right? And why is it that you want to do an MBA? So, so my strategy there was, you build your profile out for the next couple of years or something, and then you give your GMAT and then your interview, and probably apply
Right.
to a couple of foreign universities as well, right? So in that direction, what I did was I went and worked for a grassroots level NGO for about 6 to 6 months, 6 to 8 months.
Full time.
Yeah, full time. Uh,
Okay.
so uh, as a part of that, we set up a computer training center in rural Vizag at that time. So with the aim of teaching at least one person in each family on computers. So I trained the local a couple of trainers to run the show. I saw to it that one of the batches were trained, and then we moved out to the base location of the NGO, which was in Coorg. Right. So I've stayed in Coorg for 3 to 4 months. We set up a community center for 50 women self-help groups. This is a small village which is around 50 kilometers away from Madikeri.
Okay.
Right. So we set up a community center, a computer training center, a children's library, all in one location for women self-help groups. And at that time, I mean, in one of my trips back to my hometown in Trivandrum, I met with one of my seniors from school who was actually, running Startup Village. Startup Village was India's first PPP uh, model business incubator, which was based in Cochin, and they were into promoting student entrepreneurship for the state. So, and he was the CEO of Startup Village at that time. So he kind of liked what I was doing and where I was headed, and he asked me to come and join him. So, like that, I've worked with Startup Village for about 1.5 years. There, I did a little bit of impact consulting, government consulting as well, along with, the incubator operations at that time. So, as part of that, I got a chance to work with a lot of bureaucrats, a lot of sitting ministers at that time, right? A good amount of exposure at how policy making is done and all that,
Right.
right? And uh, so, so at that time, I felt that I've done enough to actually have a good profile, which actually makes me stand out.
So your end goal is to get into a premier
Absolutely, right.
business
So,
school. So you
absolutely,
did all of this to get there.
yes, yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. So, see, another realization which I got while working with these two organizations is impact sector and impact consulting is something which I love to do. Right. And while working with, bureaucrats and senior policymakers and all that, uh, what I realized is I know very little of how things are actually done in the upper realms, be it on the government front or be it at a corporate front, right? So it's not just enough to have passion, but you also need to have knowledge or understand how to get things done. So this was a realization that I had during my extended prep for a premier big school entry, right? And these realizations actually helped me get into it because I spoke about these realizations extensively while writing my essays for ISB, and that made a huge impact on the selection panel, right? And yeah, so this was my pre-ISB journey. So here, even though hustle was involved, everything is actually in your hands. You actually control the outcome, your timelines, and everything, right? You can actually pace. But once you get into ISB, right, it's it's a 180-degree shift like this. You don't get time for anything, right? And the first thing that you notice is when you get into such a premier institute is this, that you are just one among the many, and there are far better individuals than you out there, both in terms of capability, right, both in terms of profile, in terms of what they've done so far, so my batch had close to around 70 to 80% of engineers, and I was perhaps one of the very few who got into ISB who have not been from an NIT, a BITS, or an IIT, right? Uh, so
So it is norm that 80% of people doing post grad in B school are coming from premier engineering schools, right?
hey, it's one, you can interpret it that way as well. The second way that you can interpret it is they are used to this grind, and therefore they
Right.
know how to crack the system faster than anybody else, right? So that is a way that I would like to interpret it, because they see anybody who's getting into an IIT, and especially I don't know about now, but during 2008s and 7s and all those, right? I mean, you had to grind. It is even the same now as well, right? You have to spend 16 hours, 18 hours every day, nothing but studying. So that single-minded focus, right, that actually helps you. Um, but what worked in my advantage was that I had a very unique profile. I had done stuff with which I think very few would have done in my batch. I mean, there were people who were, national athletes. There were people who had been to the North Pole and all that. So uh, there is the other end of the spectrum, and there is this end of the spectrum in myself also, right? So that worked. I believe that worked to a huge advantage
Yeah.
for me to get into
Hmm.
ISB.
Right. So yeah, I mean, like ISB is pushing you to hustle all day. What
So
happened later?
yeah,
Yeah.
so in ISB, what happens is, you are forced to work within groups. So um, uh, in the beginning, you are divided into groups. You don't have any say on who your group mate is, right? So you are forced to work within groups. You are forced to submit projects and assignments against deadlines, for which there is no other way other than to slog through the night, right? And you will have, so that actually helps you actually learn how to allocate work amongst group members, how to actually effectively use your time to get to the end goal, right? And how to be focused and precise in your responses and answers. So these are trainings which implicitly come into you while you are working with groups and all that. And then after the first 2 months, you just get used to it, right? Then you figure out that to submit an assignment, let's say in 8 o'clock in the morning, you just need to start at around 12 o'clock at night, the previous night, and you just need to hustle for 4 hours. At that time, sleep, everything takes a back seat, because you get a lot of time for that as well. I mean, it was not all study. We have had tons of fun in the campus at that time, right? uh, so but this is what I meant when I said that it's a shift in the way you think, it's a shift in the way you approach problems, right? Because then at that time you realize how you can actually effectively manage your time, how to actually game the system to get the best out of it, right? What is it that is required by the person sitting across the table from you, which would actually take the needle forward in a positive direction. So these things premier institutes actually help you to get it, along with exposure to a lot of new information, a lot of new techniques, and the biggest asset, the people that you are studying with, right? So
Right.
right now I have friends who are starting companies, who are heading $1 million companies right now, who are in very senior positions in companies like Meta, Amazon, and all those places, right? So your alumni network is perhaps the biggest asset, and that you actually inherit once you go through those uh, you know institutes. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things even I used to tell my friends here is that I also came from a very tier 3 place in Tamil Nadu, south of Tamil Nadu. So once I graduated from VIT, that is one of the premier engineering schools.
Yeah.
So after I been there for a couple of years, I understood that okay, my life in my hometown and what I'm living here and who I'm gonna be in next 2 years will be different, and that made a huge impact. I won't say the um, whatever I learned are great, but the people around me, their lifestyles, that always pushed me to work better, pushed me to think better. That gave a different lens to me.
Absolutely.
Yes, you can still go back to your hometown, live the life there, and come here back. You'll have like different lives.
Yes.
But if you've been there in a tier two, tier three college, it won't. You might not have reached where you are now, right? Yes,
Your
right. Yeah,
environment actually pushes you to be better. It pushes you to actually perform better if your environment is you know of that sort. So I actually agree with what you're saying, right? The people you surround yourself with, if they are if they are high performers, or if they have that inclination to be top performers, right? Or to perform or to do stuff, right? Then your natural inclination will also move towards that side. Yeah.
yep. One thing I like something came up, but I totally forgot. Yeah, we'll come to the chief of staff side of things. Yes. So yeah, you said ISB helped you a lot to think better, work better, push yourself more. Then second thing is how you define your success in the role. That is something you meant. How much impact you're making every week, every day, every month, right? Because okay, to give you some context, before this role currently I'm working on, I got multiple founders of his office because I'm very young, graduated recently. So I got multiple founders of his offers wanted me to work on new initiatives they have in plan, but they don't have any I mean, like, the plan is very vague. They have just idea. They want me to come in, do the prep and get things done. Then I was talking to a couple of other friends I have in industry, and one of the word I heard is Sudarshan, founder's office is a glorified admin, right? That is something came up. Founder's office is another term for executive assistant. These are the things that came up, right? And I've seen people who are doing it also. One thing, I've seen people who are doing some really great stuff also, right? This is happening. But okay, last time when this happened, right before I joined Lead Squad, I was talking to this founder. We met in Bangalore. I went to their office. We were talking for almost 1.5 to 2 hours. I asked them just only one question: dude, how are you gonna define success for my role, which you are asking me to? Do that. I mean, because if you can't do it, maybe after 6 months, you may say that Sudarshan, I can't see where you're heading, and that won't be. I won't feel secure in the company. Just give me this answer. I mean, that's what we spoke, but that didn't work. Then I took the other offer and joined this company. Yep. How is this for you? How you define your success in the company? Is there a metric to it?
See, it's pretty dynamic if you ask me, right? So
Mhm.
what you said regarding the founders of his roles, it is easier to define success metrics. So I would say that it is easier to define success metrics for founders of his roles. And what you've heard regarding the founders office being chaotic and all that, I mean, that's true, and there is a reason for that, right? Founders office roles. So if you think about startups, right, especially early stage startups, right, nothing is defined there. So more often than not, the founder has an idea in his head, right, or her head, and they are just running with it. They know that there is a market out there. They need to experiment a lot of things during the way to actually hit the product market fit, to get it out there. um, and there are no defined processes. There are no defined KRAs to begin with, right? And founders office, if you ask me, are meant to be chaotic to a certain extent. Okay. As long as the founder knows that he requires one or two resources, so how to actually run his strategic projects, for one, right? And then so then it is easier for us to actually define key success metrics for such roles. So, for example, I mean, maybe a founder would hire a founder's office associate to basically test out a few new campaigns, like an influencer campaign, right? He doesn't know if the channel works, right? Or probably there are some strategic projects which he wants to try out just to see whether he can expand his market, right? One example that I can give you is, let's say this company X is currently in the upselling segment, and they want to try out if, final year students are a good target market for them, because ultimately they are also getting into the working space, right? But he doesn't know whether he can do that or not. So he wants somebody who is working very closely with him to actually test these things out. You can't expect your existing team to do this, because then what they are kind of doing gets derailed. So, right. So you need, I would call them ninjas. You need specific ninjas to go there, see if this thing works out, try this for around 2 to 3 months, get run a lot of experiments, understand whether it works out or not, bring the learnings back into the system so that, these mistakes are not repeated again, and then keep, doing this over and over. So in that way, it is easy for us to define the metrics of founders office roles, right? And eventually what happens inside the founders office is, people tend to realize that they are good at certain things and they're not good at some certain other things, right? And then they choose a stream they want to be in, which can be either product or marketing or operations or something like that, and then they move on to that, right? So the way personally I would approach a founders office role is, it's a path of discovery for you, right? You don't know what is it that you want to do, so you get an exposure to everything that is around you. Then you pick and choose what are the battles that you are good at and what are the battles that you want to fight, right? And then you get into those. So those are founders office. Chief of staff, I would say, I can speak for myself, right?
Yeah,
So
please.
uh, I enjoy being in the center of things. Uh, okay, so I enjoy understanding how the org is growing from a very 30,000 feet view, right? This actually gives you the complete picture of what is happening in the organization, how the org is moving forward, where can the breakages be, right? Um, and then you plug yourself into those places where you feel you can bring in a difference. You work very closely with those teams. You get those successes out of them, and then you step out again into a 30,000 view, right? So how I prefer to operate, or how my founders or CEOs in my past organizations have asked me to operate is, have an overall view of an organization, but there are two or three critical projects that they would always give me. So in MPL, I was hired as a chief of staff for one of their strategic business units at that time. Okay, so it was a very small team, and when I joined, it was around 5 to 12 members, right? So and the idea of the team was to make AAA quality mobile games, something in the lines of Call of Duty, uh, or the other one, you uh, what is the other?
PUBG types.
PUBG. Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
missed it. Call of Duty, PUBG, and all that, right? So. Uh, And the first thing that I had to do when I got into the company was to do technical program management.
Right.
So you had to, and I'm a thorough business guy. I've never talked to technical teams in the past. A little bit of exposure which I got was with an academy when I had to actually work with the product team to get out a couple of features for myself, right?
Right.
But I've not talked to engineers or ran Scrum meetings or anything like those. But that was the first thing that I was asked to do, because at that time we were working with a lot of foreign studios, and they needed somebody to actually lead these discussions from their side. Okay, so for the first 3 months till they got a technical program manager in, I was actually running the daily Scrum meetings. I was talking to engineers on features that they are developing. I was solving, problems for the engineers with our engineering team, being the bridge between both engineering teams and all that, the product teams and all that, right? And and then I steadied the ship till a technical program manager came in. I moved out, right? And then the next project that I was given was, we had to heavily invest in game art. right? And game art making is a very long and tedious process, right? And so I had to find studios to do this again. So the next 2 or 3 months went behind identifying international studios, art studios, who can actually work for us, right? Bring those studios and figure out their terms and conditions, their agreements, and all that, right? And get the ball rolling in that set processes for those until an art director came who could actually take this ball forward and take the the team forward as well. Right. Immediately after that, it was about fundraising. Right. So I plugged myself there, helped the CEO fundraise, went along with him to all the meetings, made sure that everything was in place for fundraising, and that happened for another 3 to 4 months till it was sure that we will close the funds. Right. So uh, when the role is so dynamic or so shifting, at least in my case, what would be my KRAs for a month, or what would be my KRAs say for a quarter, right? It is not possible to define it, right? And for a smaller organization, I feel that it is okay because everything is out there in the open. You work with hardly 10 to 15 people at that time, right? So it is not. And why do we have success metrics? It is basically to make sure that you have a goal in front of you and you know what you're doing, right? That is one. And the second is it's also a performance feedback, right? Is there any place where you have to improve yourself? Are you actually uh, you know uh, giving to the organization, or are you actually fulfilling your purpose within the organization? So for that, what I used to do was we used to have the founder and I used to have a 15-day catch up for twice in a month, where we just sit for an hour, we just discuss it, we just open out. He talks to me about where I could have improved, right? And I also give him the same feedback that this was not right, this may not have been the right way to go forward. And he also takes my feedback, right? So and that was enough for us, right? Because see, the end goal is not your um, 6 months appraisal cycle at that time. The end goal at that time when you're working for an early stage company is to make the company.
MPL have a 6 months appraisal cycle.
At that time, I think it had. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, fine.
and
Listeners, okay.
and by that time, we had grown to such an extent that we could no longer be called a strategic business unit within the company. So we rebranded ourselves as Mayhem Studios, right? And right now, Mayhem is a separate entity, a separate
Okay.
private limited company. We raised $20 million at that time, our first Series A, and we moved out as a separate company with MPL as one of the majority stakeholders inside the firm.
Okay, so you consult to MPL as one of your, I mean, like you consult to MPL, and what other companies you do consult
See, it's
when
not a
may
consulting
have.
business. So I was hired into MPL, right, into one of their strategic business units. But during the course of my tenure there, the business needs changed totally. Right. And at that time, the best way for us to move forward was because, see, the vision of Mayhem was different from the vision of MPL. That is
Okay.
something which the leadership actually discovered during the process of it. Right. MPL is more into real money gaming and all that stuff, and Mayhem is more into hardcore gaming, right? AAA games. Uh, so, as I said, like PUBG, Call of Duty, and all those, right? So you need dedicated focus, you need specialized resources to actually run the ship, and this needs a different set of genes altogether, if I may. Right. So at that point, it seemed the best way to move forward was to make this as one of the sister ships of MPL with the guidance of MPL, right? And that's how it went forward.
Right. Awesome. So every quarter you have a new goal um,
See,
to
actually, it's
achieve.
not right to actually define it on a timely basis also. And there is a reason for that, right?
Okay.
Uh, you know, as I said, things are so dynamic at that time, right?
Right.
at that time, that you get thrown into whatever is the most pressing need at that time.
I think when you're there, there was a policy came from a government. I think MPL have cut their team to half, if I'm not wrong.
That was after I left. Yeah, that was after I left, and at that time, I don't think it affected Mayhem much because they were a different company by that time.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So what I could understand is, okay, you have one primary goal, maybe multiple
Yes.
smaller goals going on every time,
Yes.
and founders office something can be defined
Yes.
because that is coming with a smaller project. But when it comes to chief of staff, it's a bigger project. You have to handle multiple bigger stakeholders and also create good impact, right?
Yes.
But okay, coming from that middle class mentality which we spoke a little back, the security part of it, right? How you feel about it? How like I think you are in a secure place now. I believe, but how do you look at it?
It is tough. I understand what you're saying, right? Uh, so there have been uh, so a mark of a good organization is, you don't have to firefight, or you don't have to fight fire 24/7, 365 days a year, right? You learn from your mistakes. You don't repeat those mistakes and you move on, right?
Right,
So uh, the problem with having such a I would say a dynamic role is at times you may not have any work at all, right? For extended periods like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, where you don't get a project, but all that you do is you hold your fort. You make sure that your BAUs are happening, right? That is, uh, in a way, that is also that's also part of the role. But when uh, you have been working, let's say, for 8 to 10 hours a day, and then suddenly you feel that there is nothing to do, you start getting sort of a withdrawal, if you know what I mean, right? So at that times, sometimes the nerves start playing. But I've been fortunate to work in organizations where um, they never made me feel uncomfortable in any way, or I've never had people, or never had my founders come up and ask me, uh, "What are you doing today?" Right? Because I've been part of organizations in the past where I've heard managers ask this question, right? What are you doing today? How are
consults versus startups.
Sorry?
Consults versus startups.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, yeah,
right. So, uh, see, but as long as you have stuff to show of what you have done in the past, you have things to show that you have made a positive impact for the organization. I don't think you should be worried about uh, your future in terms of getting another job or something like that. Um, because no matter what changes happen, I believe that there will always be a need for smart people, for people with high intent, uh, for people with very high intent to actually stay in the workforce, right? Because they are assets for the companies, right? So I've never been kind of worried that I may not get a job or something like that. But yes, I mean, one thing is, as market changes, you may not demand the same amount of um salary, if I may, or you may not demand the same amount of remuneration. So, uh, and that is not the fault of yourself or the company that you're going. It is just the market recorrecting itself. So, in COVID or pre-COVID or COVID eras, you will definitely, you would have got, let's say, a 60%, 70%, or an 80% hike, right? But right now, if you go out into the market, you are lucky if you can get a 20% or a 25% hike, right? And uh, and for senior level positions such as the chief of staff, right, you have to think beyond your CTC, right? uh, it's I would say, I mean, you need to have a long term vision or a scenario in your mind, and not just what you're actually getting in your hand. because at that time it's more about it's a risk. Anywhere, any startup that you join, it comes with an inherent risk, right? You need to, and you are senior enough to understand that everything is not going to be a bed of roses, right? Anything can change at any point of time. The startup can fail, but it's a journey that you need to take with the founder and with the senior leaders, right? and and it's a journey that you can take in hope that it will work out, and your payout at the end would be insane. That is the risk that you take, and for that, if you have to sacrifice on what you're getting right now, you should do that, is what I feel, right? As long as so one thing that I check for myself is, can the current pay sustain my current lifestyle, okay, in terms of what I get in hand at the end of the month, because everything else is a long term investment, right? You don't need the money right now, but you're planning for your future. You're planning so that you don't have to work your ass off, let's say after 55 years. You can sit in your home and you can let your money earn money for you, right? So joining early stage startups is also a risk like that. It is also an investment in your future in a way or the other. And the thing with investments is, they can either succeed or they can either fail. As long as you realize that there are two possible outcomes there, you're fine with it. You just go with the flow, right? And anyways, it is not possible for anyone to actually plan your life out for more than 5 years, 10 years, especially in this dynamic environment, right? So think about
Not
it.
even 2 3 years now.
Not even 2 3 years for that matter.
Yeah,
10 years down before, if I had told you that 80% of what I do right now can be automated with AI agents, nobody would believe you. But right now, it is a possibility, right? And when such a possibility exists out there, why would a business owner or a founder spend, say, lakhs of rupees on a highly experienced resource, instead of having a 2 3 years or 4 years experienced resource who is smart enough, who's smart, who can actually automate the rest of the processes and get the work done for him? It's cost saving for him, right? It is good for the business, right? So he would obviously take this route forward. There is no doubt about it. Yeah.
right. Yeah, in between you mentioned long term. Whatever you're doing now, it is a investment for your future. That is one thing. Second thing, you should have a good idea about what's your long term career goals and stuff, right? So what's next, Rakesh? Because one more thing which I heard and read in the way is, of course, you are a chief of staff now. You're almost in the CXO levels. So, what's the next step? Are you going to specialize, or since you said in between for founders office, where you have to figure out whether to get into operations, marketing, product, whatever, right? But for roles like chief of staff, what are your ambitions now?
So talking personally about me, I see. So with me, it was never like, and I see just one thing in front of me and I move towards that, right? And probably that is not the right thing to actually say in a podcast, which would be viewed by others. But I usually keep 3 or 4 outcomes ahead of me, and whichever of these outcomes come, I'm happy with it, right? And then probably I'll walk down that path to figure out if that is good for me or not. So, for example, um, so if you're asking what are my long-term ambitions, I don't know right at this point of time, right? Maybe I will start something on my own if I find a team or if I find a partner who can walk with me in that. Right, that is one way. So since I've worked with, so even before being the chief of staff to CEOs and founders, I was always part of the core team where I used to work very closely with founders. I used to interact with investors and all that, and I love that. Right. So maybe I will take a role inside a VC where I can keep continuing to do that. Right. Mentor companies, young founders who are coming up, and do that. That is one way that I can see myself move forward. Another way is, I loved the time when I used to work for Startup Village and for the NGO. So maybe I'll take up some role in impact consulting, or work for non-profit organizations, right, when I feel like it, because that was a time when I felt the most peace at heart, That was a time when I was extremely happy when I went to bed at night thinking that I've done something today, right? So and the only reason why I decided to move on from that is happiness will not fill your stomach, especially when you're coming from a middle class family. You
Yeah.
know what I mean, right?
Yeah, true, true.
So and eventually I may even go to that, but uh, but yeah, I mean these are 3 or 4 options that are ahead of me. If you're generally asking for a chief of staff role, in addition to this, you can move into a completely strategy role inside your company itself, like a chief strategy officer heading the entire strategy piece for the company. That is one. The second is, if the company grows to an extent where they have multiple business lines, you can take over a completely business line, a complete new business line, and make yourself as the CEO of that business line. I know people who have done this also, right, where they grow out that vertical into a company on its own, a company by itself, having.
Mayhem.
Yeah, mayhem, but yeah, mayhem is an example, right? So these are the options out there.
Right. Right.
Or you can
Interesting.
continue remaining as a chief of staff as well. I don't see a problem in that, as long
Hmm.
as this role is relevant and founders find this role to be contributing to the growth of the company. Why not?
So one thing I could understand or see is you find fun in doing new things. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Yes.
Hmm. Right. Is there any initiatives which you pick recently?
So everything I pick up turns out to be an initiative, if
Okay.
you ask me that.
Okay.
And everything comes with a learning experience in
Hmm.
itself. So I'm kind of a person who gets bored if I keep doing the same thing over and over again. I mean, I can do it for, let's say, 1 month, 2 months, maybe 3 months or 4 months, but at some point of the or the other, I may get bored of it, right? So as I said in Mayhem, right? I mean, fundraising was a crazy experience. Uh, the amount of work that goes behind actually to convince a person sitting in front of you to invest money in yourself, right? Uh, and and that is precisely the reason why, and that along with the conviction that your idea is going to succeed, right? These are two reasons why I have insane amount of respect for founders, right? And because what I realized for myself is, this is not a journey which I can take. I may be able to take. I wouldn't say I can take. I would say I may be able to take, because um, you're betting everything on that one single idea that you have, right? It may turn out well, as I said, risk versus rewards. It may turn out well, it may turn out bad, right? And to be able to walk that path, it's insanely crazy, right? Uh, but yeah, so as I said, fundraising was an insane experience, and immediately after that, we kind of realized that we had to actually bring down our costs, um, because we had made the decision to move out of the umbrella of MBL. So there was a limit to which we can actually depend on them also as a parent company, right? So we had to be very prudent, very frugal with our costs as well, which meant we need to cut costs, right? So um, I had a lot of help at that time, but still, going through that process of figuring out where the inefficiencies are within the system, and then having those difficult conversations, be it internally or be it with your external vendors who you have worked for more than a year, it's not tough. I mean, so it's not easy, it's tough, right? So I led all those conversations, especially with the external vendors, right, where we cut all of them for that matter, and all of them were in amicable terms, right? We figured out middle grounds. We figured out what's best for us and what's best for them, and we shook hands and we parted. But that was an eye opener for me, that you keep your emotions aside while doing business. At the end of the day, uh, you know it's about the business surviving. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like that, at that point of time, we were burning close to around 750K per month, uh, uh, and this is in dollars, not in Indian
Hmm.
rupees, right? We bought it
How
down.
many of you there?
The team size was around 120, 130 at that time. The studio
For
was
Mayhem alone.
yes.
Right.
And then we bought it down to around 400K, 450K per month.
Right. So most of them are engineers, game designers, or like how do you define them? What
Internal
exactly?
cutting was not that much, if you ask me.
Okay.
Right.
Mhm.
It was more of what we was, because the problem with developing a AAA model game in within the country is you don't find that talent within the country, because this is a new uh, area or a sector that's coming up, right? So at that time, you wouldn't believe, we used to hire Unity. The game was made in Unreal Engine, right? So
Okay.
when we started off, we could not find any Unreal engineers in the country. So our first engineers that we hired were Unity engineers who trained, upskilled themselves into Unreal while working on the job, right? And crazy people. I mean,
Right.
um, uh, extremely talented, extremely crazy people. They came and they did a wonderful job. So such talent. So we need to have pace also, and for that we had to go to global studios. When you go to global service providers, the problem is they are expensive, and that is how the cost ballooned, right? So we had studios working out of Europe. We had studios working out of the US. We had studios working out of Ukraine, for that matter, at that time, right? So now we decided to cut all of them. So that cost brought it down by around 75% at that
You
time.
could you were able to produce almost a equal quality after cutting down all the vendors,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, by that
right?
time, we could find internal, I mean, Indian studios for art who could actually give us this thing. And by that time, working with the external studios, the internal team had developed the capability to do everything inside. I mean, they are also uh, scaling themselves up, right? So uh, we had figured that part out by at that time. And one thing we also realized is, this was the model to go forward. So we invested in engineers inside the company. We brought them up. We gave them all the tools and all the trainings that were required. And the first engineers who were joined by that time, they had become experts in how to actually game the system, how to actually use the system themselves, right? So that led to a lot of cost cutting by letting go of the external vendors. And internally, we found a couple of inefficiencies which we had to let go of. But
Right.
yeah, that's how it happened.
Awesome. Interesting. I'm having a lot of fun here, right? Because this conversation, I kind of aimed in a different way, but
Okay.
it is going in a different way, right?
Okay.
Like your role. Yes, yes, right. With that, yes, I see. Okay, I recently saw this LinkedIn page called Founders Office Club or something,
Okay.
right?
Uh,
And I could see more people coming into this generalist roles. Maybe they are figuring out, or maybe they find fun in doing new things. Um, yep. So, what will be your advice for them?
See, uh, it's a journey that everybody has to take. I mean, especially, and think of it. I mean, how many people exactly know what is it that they want to do with life? I didn't know. Right. The reason why I joined Capgemini in the beginning is because software engineering at that time, or a software job at that time, was the shit to have. Right. So think about it. You get into an engineering college. The sole purpose of getting into an engineering college is because you get a campus recruitment. It comes in, right. And the fun fact is, I did not get this job through campus recruitment. I went outside the campus to actually get this job. Right.
Right.
So, so I wanted to know what this was about. What was the software job about, right? Uh, I didn't connect with it because I didn't understand at the end of the day why I was doing this. You are part of a big project in that you are given a small segment of it, and you actually handle a smaller segment inside the small segment, right? It's basically your day is based on tasks, but how does it add up in the entire picture? Maybe I was just starting my career, and I could not figure that part out, and that actually ate into my brains, right? Like at the end of the day, you were doing something which you were asked to do without knowing why you were doing it, right? So that was the reason why I decided not to choose that career path, right? And then the ultimate choice was you figure out what is it that you want to do. During the next 2 years, I figured out that this is something which I enjoy, working in the impact sector, in impact consulting, along with startups and all those. But then you realize, this is not enough to actually run your life. So so for me, every stage was kind of a personal discovery for myself, where I figured out what is it that I don't want to do rather than what is it that I want to do. Okay. And eventually you can hope that you end up with a role or with a job where you feel that, yes, this is where I want to be, this is where I want to do, and this is what I will do. Okay. So uh, so for those entering founders office roles is also something like that. I mean, they may not have found their niche, or probably another scenario is, they have this uh, you know um, um thing in their mind that they want to start something on their own. They want to be entrepreneurs. And the best way to learn about entrepreneurship is to work with entrepreneurs, right? Um, those are some of the people who enter into founders office roles, right? Um, so I would say, um, and for anything, when you're starting off the career, there are a few things which you should mandatorily go through, is what I feel. One is hustle. You need to understand how to put in the hard work that is needed, right? Um, you you need you need to suffer. There is no better word for it. Okay, because suffering brings happiness in the end. Suffering creates character, right?
Right.
And that is something that will actually stay with you for the rest of your life, right? You need to have zero ego. You do what you're told to do, because at this point of time, you don't know what you have to do. So when somebody is telling you to do this, you do that. It can be setting up meetings. It can be taking down notes. It can be freeing up your founder's calendar. It can be booking flight tickets for him. I have actually coordinated with teams to actually book my founder's flight tickets, and for myself, right? Bring zero ego into the table. There is no place for ego. You exist for the company to move forward. You exist to learn new skills. And for that, you cannot have any ego. You do what you're asked to do. Right.
Right.
Um, yeah, I mean, that's what I would say. I mean,
So with that, I'll wrap this episode. Thank you so much for doing this, Rakesh. I really enjoyed talking to you.
thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Sudarshan. I loved talking to you. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.